Kafka's signature Lightcone is a great Lightcone, but how does it hold up to the other 4-star Nihility Lightcones in the game, and also this secret Lightcone as well? Keep that secret Lightcone on the DL though, because the Hoyo spies might be watching. I'm gonna go over the usable 4-star Lightcones and Welt's Lightcone, compare them to her signature Lightcone. I'll give my thoughts on why you should or shouldn't use them, and towards the end of the video, I'll show you some of Kafka's solo damage using a somewhat unoptimized build. So let's go ahead and start with Welt's signature Lightcone. This will increase Kafka's damage to debuffed enemies. Debuffing enemies is incredibly easy with Kafka because DOTs are considered debuffs. When using the wearer's skill, the effect hit rate of the skill increases by 18%, and also their attack will increase by 24%. So do note that the effect hit rate and the attack percent bonus only applies to her skill, not her ultimate, and not her follow-up talent attack. Unfortunately, effect hit rate is not too useful on Kafka since she only needs about an extra 10% effect hit rate after you've unlocked one of her traces that gives her an extra 30% to the base chance of all of her abilities to apply shock. The attack increase is also only applicable to the skill, so it's not going to improve any of her shock dot damage. Kafka's also not really going to be built for crit, so it's not like our crit damage numbers are going to get any higher with this extra attack percentage. It's a nice to have, but it just unfortunately doesn't apply to the rest of her kit. Being a 5-star, however, though, the base attack is quite high compared to our 4-star options. But how much of a difference does that actually make? And we'll see when I show you some of the calculations that I did. The next Lightcone is Good Night and Sleep Well, and this is probably her best 4-star Lightcone. For every debuff that the target has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by 12%, up to 3 times. This effect also applies to the dot. So at S1, we get a 36% damage increase to all of her moves, and at S5, we get a 72% damage increase to all of her moves, as long as the target has 3 debuffs. Applying 3 debuffs should not be too difficult with a Kafka team, especially if you're using Sampo. Shock, Wind Shear, and Dot Vulnerability already covers 3 debuffs on the target. And if you also decide to throw in some Defense Shred, it'll make it even easier. Do note that this damage bonus will not apply to Weakness Break dot damage. This Lightcone also does not give us any effect hit rate, but again, Kafka doesn't really need that much effect hit rate. We can easily achieve an extra 10% from substats on our relics. In summary, Good Night and Sleep Well basically gives us the highest damage bonus out of all of our 4-star Lightcones. Next up is Fermata, and this is a very obtainable Lightcone because you can buy this out of the shop from the Lightcone Manifest. This Lightcone will increase our break effect and then also increase our damage to enemies that are afflicted with shock or wind shear. Shock and Wind Shear is perfect for Kafka because Sampo is one of her best teammates, so getting this damage bonus is going to be incredibly easy. Increasing our break effect is going to make it so that when Kafka breaks the enemy, she deals even more initial damage, and then the shock that comes from the dot is going to be increased even further. So this Lightcone is just incredibly solid as long as you play around the fact that you want to be breaking the enemies with Kafka. That's how you get the maximum value out of this, and the damage bonus is incredibly easy to achieve. Comparatively to Good Night and Sleep Well though, the damage bonus that this provides is just much lower than Good Night Sleep Well, and that's why this Lightcone is rated slightly lower, because it takes a little bit more work. Next up is Eyes of Prey, and this is only going to increase our dot damage from her kit. Again, just like Good Night Sleep Well, this is not going to increase the dot damage that we inflict via Weakness Break. This will also increase Kafka's effect hit rate, but again, just like mentioned before, effect hit rate is not super useful for Kafka because she only needs a little bit. And so even at higher imposition for this Lightcone, your skill, your ultimate, and your follow-up attack initial damage is going to stay the same. The only thing that changes is the shock damage that gets applied from her talent and her ultimate. And you definitely shouldn't underestimate that initial damage that comes from her skill, her ultimate, and her talent, because it's definitely a decent amount. And so that's why Eyes of Prey is rated the lowest. We probably don't want to use Silver Wolf's 4-star Lightcone because Kafka doesn't really want effect hit rate, and there's also no extra damage bonuses from this Lightcone. The extra energy that we get from this Lightcone also cannot be achieved with Kafka alone. You're gonna need an extra teammate like Pela or Silver Wolf herself in order to help proc this. And also because of the fact that you'd probably rather just have this on either Pela or Silver Wolf over Kafka. There's just much more value having it on those characters than it is for her. And then for Luca's Lightcone, this is also more of a supportive Lightcone and doesn't increase our damage directly. It decreases defense, which will indirectly increase our damage, but again, more of a supportive Lightcone and so probably better off on a character that is more built for support. Alright, and now that secret light cone that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. It is called Solitary Healing, and it is a new light cone that might come to Herta's store. It will increase our break effect by 40% at Superimposition 5, and increases the dot dealt when our ultimate is used for 2 turns. The dot dealt is increased by 48%. It also regens 8 energy whenever we defeat an enemy that is affected by the user's dot. The thing to note about this dot is that it doesn't specify that the wearer has to defeat the enemy. So if it gets defeated by any party member, as long as it is shocked, you should regen 8 energy. And 8 energy is a lot of energy. Break effect is just a solid stat to have for Kafka, especially against lightning weak enemies, and that extra dot damage is a pretty good boost to her shock damage. So overall, this Lightcone has the potential to be really good because it increases our damage, increases our break effect, and gives us the potential to unleash more ultimates. It basically improves almost every single part of Kafka's kit. And then next up is Kafka's signature Lightcone. It's going to give her a global damage increase of 24%, and then after every attack unleashed by the wearer, her speed is going to increase by 4.8%, increasing up to 3 times. Kafka has a base speed of 100, so that means 4.8% extra speed means 4.8 points of extra speed. 4.8 times 3 means we get 14.4 extra points of speed once we hit the max cap. The last effect of this Lightcone is the ability to inflict Erode, which is a 100% base chance to inflict shock, which will deal lightning dot equal to 60% of her attack at the end of the turn. The erode only lasts for 1 turn. And so this is a solid light cone because of that unconditional 24% damage boost and also that speed boost. If that speed boost is able to get us to certain breakpoints, that means Kafka is going to be able to do bonus actions within certain cycles. The more actions that Kafka is able to do, the more dots she's able to preemptively activate. The shock that comes from this light cone is quite weak though, but an extra instance of shock dot is an extra instance of shock dot, so you can't really complain about it. It's just extra damage. And that damage can definitely stack with that extra speed if you're continually, preemptively proccing those DOTs. And so what are the pros and cons of Kafka's light cone? Well, the good thing about our light cone is that it's the only light cone that gives us speed. So if you can't be bothered to farm for speed on your substats or get a speed boot on your relics, in order to reach certain speed breakpoints, then Kafka's light cone is perfect because if we can get her to do extra actions within certain cycles, it just means extra damage. However, if your team and build is already able to reach certain speed breakpoints, then you don't need Kafka's light cone because the extra speed won't be making any differences. If you have speed on your build already and her light cone is able to push you to the next breakpoint, then her light cone is 100% worth considering. However, since the speed buff from the light cone comes after each time she attacks, the speed isn't given to us instantly. That means her action value is calculated each time she does an action. So it's a lot harder to predict when she's going to get that bonus action. Because if we're going off of the speed table that Grimm shared with us all, do remember that he said that this chart only applies to turn 0 and if we aren't including any kinds of speed bonuses or buffs. So by adding in all those variables, then everything starts to change. So it's very hard to predict how the speed buff is really going to behave and when Kafka is going to get her bonus actions. Trying to predict where those bonus actions are going to occur is definitely going to take a little bit more work, or just waiting for her release and experimenting with the light cone. But just keep in mind that the potential for her to get bonus actions is there because the light cone gives us extra speed. And that's what puts her light cone above all the other light cones. Kafka's light cone also just makes relic farming a lot easier. You don't need to search as hard for all of those relics with speed substats. And the extra speed boost from the light cone could be all the difference between needing boots with speed versus boots with attack percentage. And so what are the speed breakpoints for Kafka? In order to get a bonus action on cycle 0, you need at least 134 speed. In order to get a bonus action on cycle 1, you need to hit 161 speed. In order to get a bonus action on cycle 2, you need 143 speed. So those are the main breakpoints, 134, 143, or 161. Getting that bonus action at least within the first 2 cycles is pretty good. So if you're able to get enough speed where Kafka's light cone is going to push you to 161, then her light cone is definitely worth it. However, if you can't hit 161 and you have enough speed from substats, then perhaps the other light cones will be better. So think about what breakpoints you want to hit and in which cycles you want Kafka to get that extra bonus action. Good night, sleep well at higher imposition is going to give you the highest damage numbers, but doesn't provide us with that speed. So that means we might not get those bonus actions, which means our overall damage within the fight is going to be lower than her signature Lightcone. The new 5-star Lightcone Solitary Healing is a very interesting Lightcone. Although its damage numbers are a little bit low, that extra energy that we get on our ult could make a huge difference. If we're able to get those ults more often, then that means we're proccing dots prematurely more often, which just means more damage. Surely one of those Lightcones are going to turn out to be the best, but right now, all we can really do is think about it and theorize. Until she actually comes out, that's when we'll know for sure which one ends up being the best. And if you happen to not have Good Night Sleep Well at max Superimposition level, according to my calculations, if you're able to get it to a Superimposition 3, the damage numbers are about the same between her signature Lightcone and Good Night Sleep Well. With that said though, Good Night Sleep Well Superimposition 2 is just slightly lower, barring of course without all those extra speed buffs, which can make a huge difference. Okay, now let's get into some very basic calculations. The Kafka that I'm using is going to be using her signature Lightcone, which puts her at 4,115 attack. She's going to be level 80 and attacking another level 80 enemy. She's going to be hitting an enemy that is also weak to lightning. All of her abilities are also at level 8. Her shock DOT damage here, just solo Kafka, is going to be 7,192. Her skill, 4,480. Her talent, 3,360. And her ult does 2,304. Now imagine a turn where Kafka is able to use all of her abilities at least one time. The total damage she's going to be able to output is 24,380. This damage includes her ult, proccing the shock at 100% of the damage, and her skill, proccing the shock at 71.25% of the original damage. In order for this to happen though, the enemy was assumed to have already been shocked from either her ult or talent from a previous turn. Now imagine other DOTs applied onto the enemy. Every DOT would trigger and the damage would increase drastically. For those that think that this might be a little bit low, keep in mind that this doesn't include any damage from Sample's dot vulnerability or any extra dots that may be inflicted onto the enemy. Also, we have no attack buffs or damage buffs that your team may be providing. This is also just onto one single target. If there are multiple enemies on the field and the ult is proccing DOTs on all of them, then that damage can easily double, triple, or even more. Now let's look at a 4-star Lightcone. We're going to look at Good Night Sleep Well at Superimposition 5. Our attack drops down to 3,812, but we're going to assume all of the same parameters from before. We'll also assume the maximum damage bonus from the Lightcone, 72% extra damage bonus. Our shock damage is 8,512, our skill 5,303, our ult 2,727, our talent 3,977. Now again, imagine a turn where we're able to use all of her abilities at least once. The total damage is about 26,582. And so even though we're getting a massive damage bonus at 72% versus the 24% from her signature Lightcone, the damage is only about 10% more in this very specific scenario that I'm presenting. The erode damage from her signature Lightcone, getting procced multiple times from her ultimate and her skill, definitely helps out quite a bit. Now let's add Lightning Weakness Break into the mix. We're also going to assume the same assumptions that we've been using before. I'll show you a quick chart of all of the Lightcones that I compared, and you'll see that with another lightning dot applied, you'll see that Fermata gets much better, especially at Superimposition 5. That extra break effect definitely helps out quite a bit. With Lightning Weakness Break dot applied onto the enemy, the damage increases by about 24% for her signature Lightcone and 22% for Good Night Sleep Well at Superimposition 5. So you can see the potential of just adding more and more dots onto the enemy than having them all proc whenever we use our skill and ultimate. I'm just barely scratching the surface here with these calculations. Now, I showed you that Good Night Sleep Well S5 had higher damage numbers than her signature Lightcone. Now, although this is true, remember that her signature Lightcone gives her speed. So if she's able to get an extra bonus action and if she's able to use her skill once again, then her damage is going to be a lot better than Good Night Sleep Well at Superimposition 5. So if we assume that she's able to get one more skill off, then that damage before, where I said it was about 24,380, that goes up to 33,433 for that turn. Using her skill and then proccing her shock damage from her abilities, and then also proccing that erode damage. And so there are a couple of other notable Lightcones we should look at here. In the Name of the World and Solitary Healing. They're both pretty decent Lightcones. Although Solitary Healing does slightly less damage, the utility from it might actually end up being better. And then Welt's Lightcone ends up being just a pretty solid stat stick, but if you have good night's sleep well at higher imposition, then you should probably just go for that instead. And so now let's just go over my build. You can see that our attack is at 4,114. In the video I said 15, but this is just off because of some rounding errors, but 1 point of attack is not going to make that much of a difference. HP, defense, and speed. Presumably, I'm going to be using a speed boot, but just decided not to add it here. She has her signature light cone, and the hand piece is at a maximum plus 15. The body piece, maximum plus 15, giving us 43.2% extra attack. The link rope also giving us more attack percentage. And then we also have some substats here. 28 extra from substats in attack percentage and 150 flat attack. We have some from traces, an extra 10% HP and an extra 28% for attack percentage. And then relics, 20% from the Band of Sizzling Thunder. And then planar ornaments, Space Sealing Station is going to give us an extra 24%, and that should about cover everything. Oh, and actually forgot to mention the 38.8% lightning damage bonus, and then an extra 10% from the artifact set as well. So that's the build, and it's definitely pretty unoptimized. You could probably hit better substats in attack percentage and flat attack to increase your damage even more. And also, you could potentially replace your feat with another attack percentage if you get enough speed substats. And if you guys have some more questions on how dot specifically works in Honkai Star Rail, I actually just made a video that explains exactly all of the dot mechanics in the game, and it's definitely something that you should know if you plan to play Kafka. I'll leave the video on the screen now.